was a very special song. And you bound for the promised land? Yes? It's getting closer? Do you think so? Hey, before I pray, I just want to ask you to just smile to each other, turn around and say hello. Look at these young people over there. You should go and say hello to others on this side. On this side, yeah? Yeah, come on, come. No, not like that. Get up and say hello. See? Yeah? Oh, yes. I didn't succeed. It's okay. Let me pray. Father, what a beautiful day today is. To be in this place, to be with your people, to be part of a holy Christian tradition centered in your word, knowing we are loved, knowing where we are going. Lord, yet we live in a world as is, with problems that are universal, but also personal problems that we face. And Lord, come please today. Speak to us through your word. We ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Let me read a text for today. And we are still in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 24. And I'm reading from verse 4 to verse 13. And Jesus answered them, "See that no one leads you astray." Or another translation says, "See that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and they will lead many astray," or they will deceive many. "And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. And these are but the beginning of the birth pains. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved." As a church, we are known as people who are eagerly waiting for the second coming of Jesus. And we often talk about the signs of the second coming of Jesus. And we look around what is going on in the world. And we go back always to this chapter to talk about the signs. But what struck me, and I'm going to experiment with you today, is, do you know that each sign that Jesus gives is accompanied by a clear instruction or a command that matches that sign? Do you know that? You do. Okay. But in the past, we have paid more attention to the signs than to the instructions that Jesus has given to each sign. Hello? Anybody out there? Oh, let me test you. Okay. Many false Christs will arise. What was the instruction that Jesus gave? I'm hearing murmur. Somebody say it a little more louder. Don't be deceived. Thank you. You're good. You're disproving my theory. But let's see how we go on. Wars and famines and pestilences. What was the instruction Jesus gave? What was it? Very good. Did you read in the Bible or something? That's cheating. Okay. You will be hated, persecuted, and killed. What was the instruction Jesus gave? It's becoming harder, doesn't it? Isn't it? Okay, so let me start. So let's start from the beginning. Many false Christs will arise, and don't be deceived. For wars and famines and pestilences, what? Don't be afraid of COVID. Okay, we won't go there. Next one. You will be hated and persecuted and killed. What was it? Endure and don't be offended. We'll come back to this, okay? False prophets will arise and lawlessness will abound. What is it? You're quiet. You're proving now my theory. Preach the gospel. Speak it and live it. You can almost say that every single sign is accompanied, and it's kind of in the left column what you see, it's like a problem that Jesus is describing. And the instruction that he gives and the command, it's almost like an antidote, how you can deal successfully with the problem. Okay, next one. Abomination of desolation when it happens. What do? Good one. Good one, James. You're a good student of the word. Good one. Yeah. Flee and? James. Flee and? Okay. You saw that. Next one. False Christs and false prophets will appear. What do? Hey? Hey, you. Don't believe, don't trust them, and don't go after them. Okay, I want you to see something else. Look what Jesus is saying. Don't be deceived, don't be alarmed, don't be afraid. Endure, don't be offended. Don't trust and go after false prophets. I was thinking about this, and every single one of these that I have put up, they're internal actions, they're internal realities. It's nothing to do with what you are to do outwardly. And that's the essence of a great controversy. It's not so much what you are going to do physically, but what happens here matters and is the most important. So it is, Jesus is saying to us, pay attention. And what happens in you, what happens here, that's what matters the most. Everything else is just a consequence. And just look at this one. He says, preach the gospel. That's kind of an action. That's an external thing. Then he says, flee. The only thing that I could find here is when abomination of desolation takes place, you flee. That's a physical thing. Everything else is what happens here and what happens in your heart. This is what we are going to cover today. It all starts with deception. Number 2, we shouldn't be afraid. Number 3, we are not to be offended. And number 4, the challenge is to endure. Okay, let's start. So we covered this, I think, last time. It all starts with the deception. Jesus says there will be throughout history, and this is what Ken reminded me last time when we talked about the sermon, and that is that in the future, from that time when Jesus gave this instruction about the signs before the second coming and instructions what would happen before the destruction of Jerusalem, he said, don't be deceived by false Christs. They will come in the future. But who do you think was the very first false Christ? Satan himself, in the headquarters of the universe. He was the false Christ. What was false about him? Because he skewed the truth about who God himself is. He sowed the doubts in the minds of intelligent beings of the universe that God is not what? Love, and that God is not just, and he succeeded with 1/3 of angels. False Christ, the essence of them is that they skew the truth. They skew the truth, bend the truth. They lie about the most important person in the universe, which is God himself. And everything else goes pear-shaped as a result of that. So it all starts with a deception. Many false Christs, and Jesus says, do not be deceived. So we spoke about this last time, so I'm not going to talk about it too much today. Do you live the life which is in accordance with the truth? And when I say the truth, I just don't mean in a philosophical sense, but to everyday living where you can bend the truth or stay within the truth. Do you live that kind of life? You see, whenever you don't, you diminish. I diminish as a person. Not only in the eyes of people around me, but in my own eyes. I can see that I have diminished when that happens. You know that this is true. So do you live your life in accordance to the truth as you go through life itself? So it is this at the basic level for every human being that we are to live the life of truth, but also at the deeper level as well. Speak the truth as you see it and reject lie. Live the truth as you know it and reject lie. But also at the deeper level of what we just talked about, expose yourself to the truth of who God is. The greatest truth on which our lives, very lives depend, is that God is love. And that I remain within that circle of love is the most important need. And if we are not within this reality, we will pay the price. Abide in the truth. And abide in Jesus Christ, who is the embodiment of that truth, that God is love. We spent quite a bit of time on this whole idea of deception and the importance of living within a truth. But let's go now to the second one. Why we shouldn't be afraid. Wars. We have them. We have them now. What will be the outcome of the proxy war that is taking place in Ukraine? We don't know. We have no idea. Famines, pestilences. We are just seeing the back end of pestilence. Are we going to go into another one? What will happen with this one? What about famines? Is it possible that we are on the verge, especially as the Western society, that we will enter into the time of famines? Third world countries know what it means, but the Western countries haven't experienced it since the Second World War. This may happen. You see, we lived under the sovereign who has been sovereign for 70 years. We don't know what it means that anybody reigns but Queen Elizabeth. What a woman. Queen Elizabeth II, our queen. This is new time now. This is new age. Is it possible that very soon we will experience famine? I don't know. It's going in that direction. It's going that way. Whatever may go wrong, it goes wrong. That's how it looks. That's our age. War, pestilences, and now economic disaster and famines. And in the midst of it, Jesus says, don't be afraid. Don't be alarmed. It's one thing to say don't be afraid when there is no reason for you to be afraid. But it's quite another thing to say don't be afraid in the midst of a problem. Have the Christians in the past lived up to the instructions that Jesus has given them in the past in relationship to there'll be wars, famines, and pestilences, and you are not to be afraid? Is this a historic reality of a Christian church of the past? I can think of the first Christian church that lived up to the instruction that Jesus commanded them in the face of famines and pestilences and war. In the year 70, they lived up and followed the instructions that Jesus gave them. They left Jerusalem at the right time, went to the place called Pella. And majority of Christians did not feel the pinch of war, famine, and pestilences. But I can see what you're thinking. But Jesus says you will be persecuted. So in other words, when spared, they lived and followed the instructions that Jesus gave them. But also, during the time of Nero, when they were persecuted and given out to lions in the arena, they also, I believe, lived within the instruction that Jesus gave them. Not only in that age, but later ages, or they are known as dark ages, they sang. Is it possible to live in the love of God when surrounded by danger and living in danger? Jesus said, don't be afraid and don't be alarmed. Well, that's a historical reality. So this instruction given by Jesus is not a meaningless command or a promise. It can be and it should be experienced in the life of a Christian. We see the world as real as is, and at the same time, in the command that he gives is also the promise and the power that we can live up in the time and age that we live in and not be afraid. Not be afraid. This is also psychological truth. Before people become casualty of war, famines, and pestilence, they become casualty of lie. Isn't that true? I would pose to you that the reason why the world finds itself in a really difficult spot is because lie triumphs. And this has been repeated throughout history. Okay, let me remind you. In the very first great controversy between good and evil, Satan lied. What happened after he lied? There was what? There was a war. So lie is followed by fear and by war. This typically happens. If you have fallen for lie, you will automatically fall for fear, and there will be a conflict. Fear in turn will disable you to think properly, and you will be outside of truth. And that's what typically happens. If you have not fallen for lie, then be strong and courageous in the truth. Remain in truth and remain in Jesus. Remain in truth and remain in Jesus. And obviously, this is a spiritual truth. So this is the anti-gospel. Falling for lie, going into fear, and experience war. That's what happened in the headquarters of the universe with Satan and his angel, or with Lucifer and his angels. Later on, it happened down on earth. When Eve and Adam fell for lie, what was one of the first things that they experienced? Fear. What followed was war or conflict in between them, then in between the people. That's anti-gospel. Look, the other side, living in the truth. The antidote against fear is love. When you live in the truth, you live in love. And the antidote against war is peace. And you can live in peace. So this is the spiritual truth. So when Jesus says, do not be afraid, this is not just some kind of wishful projection. Oh, don't be afraid. No, this is simply a consequence of you and I living in the gospel. And the outcome of living in the gospel is that we are not afraid. We're not afraid. We are not gripped in fear. Let not your heart be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me, Jesus would say. There'll be wars, famines, pestilences. Look at the world around you. It's intensifying on all these fronts. And Jesus says, you don't need to be afraid. If you are in the gospel, if you are in me, you will not live your life gripped in fear, regardless of the fact that things may intensify, and by all what we see around us, it will intensify. Do not be afraid. Do you see how it is important that we hear the sign, but that we trust the instruction of Jesus, that we remain in the gospel of Christ? We should not be offended. That's another instruction that Jesus gives. Do not be offended. So here is a sign that Jesus gives. He says, you will be hated, persecuted, and killed. Then he says two things as a part of instruction. When this happens, don't be offended and endure. Those two things. So we'll talk about both of those. Don't be offended and endure. Let me ask you a question. What causes hatred, persecution, and murder? What causes hatred, persecution, and murder? Typically. What causes it? I'm offended. But what is behind offense? Have you been offended? Have you been offended? Many times. And look, when you are deeply offended, almost you can't help yourself but to start dislike the other person. Isn't that true? As soon as the offense takes place and you are feeling it deep down, you can't help yourself but to kind of start disliking the person. Very often, typically, what is behind offense is jealousy also. Let me give you examples biblical examples before we go into maybe some other examples that are really important. Cain and Abel. Do you remember that? Do you remember the story? Who was offended? Who was offended? Cain was offended. But behind offense was what? Jealousy. Let me give you another example. Joseph and his brothers. Who was offended? Brothers. Who was jealous? Brothers. Let me give you another one. Daniel and satraps. Do you remember the story? Daniel was just promoted by King Darius to be overseer and the man in charge pretty much of the whole land. He was the second to the king. And there were 3 satraps. And Daniel was put in charge of those satraps. And suddenly they were offended, weren't they? And they were jealous. Remember this one? Jesus and Pharisees. Who was offended? Pharisees. What was behind offense? Jealousy. What were they jealous about? What was it? That Jesus became popular. That he was gripping the hearts and minds of people with the ways of God. And they were jealous. So typically behind offense is jealousy. Remember this one? In the time of economic crisis, there was a segment of German society, Jews themselves, who were faring better than the rest of them. And somebody was jealous and offended. And we know how they ended up. I was wondering whether I was going to show you the next one, but I said I'm going to show you anyway. There's a whole segment of society today who constantly feels offended. And the whole society bends over just to satisfy one section of society. Just offended. And Jesus says that many at the end of time will be offended. This is kind of a global reality at the end of time. But here it is. This is what Jesus says. Don't offend others. And at the same time, he says, don't be offended. I was trying to dig a little deeper when he said, don't offend others. And I found this. In fact, Jesus was very specific that we don't offend children. And don't be abusive to children. In the impressionate age, the abuse and offense against children will scar them for the rest of their life. Jesus said, woe to you if you do this to kids. Especially, don't offend children. Don't abuse children. But then, he would say to his disciples, to you and me, don't be offended. Jealousy and offense will be happening until the second coming of Jesus. It will be especially pronounced at the end of time. Many will be offended by the true followers of Jesus, and many will hate Christians at the end of time. Do you have what it takes? Do you have what it takes not to be offended? Especially when it happens with those who are very close to you. Are you part of anti-gospel or gospel? I want you to see the progression. You fall for lie, experience fear, then goes conflict, there's jealousy and offense. This can be part of the world, and it is part of the world, but it can be you that you are in this. This is anti-gospel. But here it is, if you are part of the gospel. You're living in the truth of who God is, and within the grasp of the love of God in you. And love reigns, and peace, and endurance, and no offense, not being offended. Let me just finish with this one. It says endure to the end. And just in last week's Sabbath school lesson, we talked about the importance of what? Of what? Patience. And we talked about endurance and long suffering. Jesus says, you're to endure. You're to endure injustice. It is tough. It is tough. Remember, Joseph was imprisoned unjustly. He had no idea how many years he's going to stay in prison, and he simply had to what? Just endure. Abel was murdered. Daniel was in lion's den. Jesus himself was killed. It's just to endure. Let me tell you my story. As you know, I grew up in a communist country, and to go to army was a bit of a challenge. There were two basic challenges that I had, and that was food, because I couldn't eat what the rest of them eat. And another one for me as a Seventh-day Adventist was keeping Sabbath. So I had a challenge on both ends. The very first Sabbath was challenged as if God was saying, okay, I'll try you with the very first Sabbath and see how you go. You see, in the whole, where I was, my unit was chosen that Sabbath to work. Everybody else was left off the hook, but my unit was to work. And I'm just this young soldier, and I say, God, what a sense of No, I said, I was thinking more about you have a sense of humor with me. And I still remember I was going and I was having this trepidation within me. And I say, this is a testing. This is testing, definitely. And I say, and this was a time where you have to decide. Are you going to do it or are you not going to do it? And there is a clear battle within me. It's just a raging battle within me. And then eventually I say, okay, I won't do it. I won't do it. And I hear the commander saying, well, I need volunteers to bring something for me. And this friend of mine and myself, he says, okay, you can go and do it. So I leave the place and I say to a friend, I'm not coming back, because I'm not going to work. He said, don't worry. I observe that you can't eat much, so I'll just lie. I said, I don't care what you're going to say, I'm not coming back. And I spent the whole Sabbath afternoon in a toilet cubicle. What a fun place to spend a Sabbath afternoon. So I survived that one. But they soon realized that I don't work on Sabbath. And I still remember hearing my name being mentioned, and I was being called to report to the officer that Saturday. And I knew exactly what he was going to do. He realized that I don't work on Sabbath, and now he was going to challenge me directly. So I come before him, and he said, your unit is working today, and I want you to go and work and report to me what you have done. And there I was, and I say, I can't. And he says to me, if you can't, then you go to hospital. But if you want, you go to prison. So what's your choice? I said, I can't. He said, you are dismissed. So I will see you later on. So guess where I went for the rest of the day? Toilet cubicle. Not a good place. And here is a point about endurance. There's nothing I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. I just said I made my decision, and I have no idea now what happens. And I had to endure. All I know that enduring, the way you endure is you pray and you say, God, here it is. But there's no shortcut. There's no praying it away. You are in this kind of a struggle within yourself, and you say, God, I'm going to stay faithful to what you said, and whatever happens now happens, but I'm still praying hard and saying, God, I don't want to, because I already spent 1 month in prison. That's for another reason, and ask me later on what happened. That was in the army. So I say, well, what could happen now? I could have even more days added to prison. And what happens, he was going to come on Monday and take me to report to a higher officer who already sentenced me previously to 1 month because I went to church. So Monday comes, the officer doesn't come back to work. Tuesday comes, he's not back. Wednesday comes, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, he comes the following Monday. And all along, throughout that week, I was wondering, what is going to happen? Am I going to end up in prison? You know, what is going to happen? So he comes and he kind of forgot. What happened, he became sick. He was sick. And because he was sick, I was let off the hook. But here's my point. There's no shortcut for endurance. You have to go through it. You don't know what happens at the end of a tunnel. You just have to go through it. That's the end time that Jesus is speaking about. When we go through the times of trouble, and maybe you are going through that time yourself now, you have to endure. Stay within the love of God, even though you might not feel it. Stay within it. Remain in Him. Be faithful to Him. You're either in the anti-gospel reality, which is you fall for lie. If you fall for lie, you will experience straight away fear. You will go into conflict. You will be easily offended. You will not be able to endure anything. If you stay in the gospel and in the love of God, love will prevail in your heart. Peace will prevail in your heart. You will be able to endure. While the choice is ours, either in anti-gospel or we are part of the gospel. We know the world around us. Jesus speaks that many will be offended. Many will be afraid. Many will be deceived. But then he says to you and me, but you, which is remnant, which is a smaller group, you can and you should live within the grasp of the gospel of Jesus Christ. There is nothing to be afraid as we move towards uncertain future. Nothing to be afraid. Live within the grasp of the gospel and the love of God and the truth of God. Don't go to the other side. Don't go and be part of the world that is massively offended or afraid because they are deceived. May God help you and me, as we don't know what happens in the future and what kind of king will Charles III be. Because we have the King, and we listen to what he's got to say to us. May God help you and me and bless us. Amen.